I'm Dan Grabois, and welcome to episode 3 of my podcast. Today I am talking with Justin Kagan. Justin, hello.
Hello, Dan.
How are you?
I'm doing okay. We're a little under the weather yesterday, but I think I can communicate. Hopefully,
You sound fine, and you're talking to me from Portland, is that right?
Portland, Oregon,
Okay.
Oregon.
Well, I knew you when you were in New York, and I was in New York, and I was a horn player, and you were a cellist.
Yes.
And let's talk about that first before we get into coffee.
Okay.
So, how long were you a professional cellist for?
Oh my God, it seems like forever. Although it wasn't forever because I did an interesting life before I got to my first real full-time gig, which was playing in the State Symphony of Mexico in Toluca, Mexico in 1990. Went down with my ex-wife, now ex-wife, and spent 8.5 years there playing principal cello in the State Symphony of Mexico Orchestra and getting to know a bunch of people in a country that I absolutely loved. So
I love Mexico too.
rough entry for the first year, getting used to it. Even though I spoke Spanish, it was more about customs and understanding social propriety and what have you. But and then dealing with a very strange conductor, a legend in the field.
I think I've heard about this conductor. I
You've
bet
heard
your
about this?
I bet your Spanish was a lot better at the end of your 8 years.
Yes, yes. It had been kind of like my one of my better subjects when I was in high school, so I spoke pretty well.
Uh-huh.
But Mexican Spanish was kind of different from what I learned at Bronx Science in New York. So
So you grew up in the city.
I grew up in the Bronx.
Uh-huh.
After a couple of years following my parents around while my dad was playing in the St. Louis Symphony and Pittsburgh Symphony, and then finally he landed at the Met in 1962
At the Metropolitan
and
Opera Orchestra.
Metropolitan Opera, yeah, and yeah, I basically, was in New York until I went to Brandeis for a couple of years, and really had the prototypical New York experience.
So you were freelancing.
Uh, I freelanced in New York after I came back from Mexico. The ostensible reason for leaving Mexico was to really get out because I had to, because it was just a crushing existence at that point. But I actually had to sort of be released to fly uh, by claiming that I was having a nervous breakdown. That's how tight it was. Of course, I wasn't, but I was going to audition at the Met in 1998 and did well. And they started hiring me as a sub, and then basically stayed in New York for about a year. Went back to get my stuff in Mexico that as much as I could carry. So basically, in 1999, I came back full time uh, and left everything, basically.
So to this point, people who are watching are saying this guy played as principal cello in a major symphony in Mexico for 8 years,
Mhm.
had experience of living in a foreign country, came back, ended up subbing in one of the best orchestras in the world that his dad was in. This is seeming like an amazing experience so far.
It was fun. Actually, my dad didn't retire till 2002, so we had 4 years where we weren't playing on the same stand because he was the assistant principal. But yeah, I kind of in 1999 I got offered to do a Europe tour with the Met, which was great, which my dad was also on. So it was like first serious tour, and it was great.
That sounds like a thrill. What would you say was the most fulfilling experience in terms of which opera, playing which opera, did it just get you going?
My peak opera experience was playing Valkyrie, the Valkyrie of Wagner with James Levine.
Hmm.
Um, Actually, the fun part is that later, I guess a couple of years in to my Met uh, subbing, I was offered to play Rosenkavalier, which of course I had experienced with you which is the funner part of the story when we were in Spoleto in
Hmm.
2000.
Right.
That was the concentration of our 5 weeks there, was playing many performances of Rosenkavalier,
It was a
and
huge
which
thrill for me, by the way, playing that.
was completely great. But having that under my fingers was great, to because James Levine's tempos were rather dastardly in certain sections. So, but yeah, it was that tied it all together actually.
Okay, so you are not currently living in New York. You are not currently playing with the Metropolitan Opera. You're not
No,
living in Mexico. You're living in Portland, Oregon.
yes.
So why don't you take us to the next part of the story?
All right, the next part of the story, well, actually, the seminal part of the Spoleto experience ties in not just with you, but into my coffee life, because it was in Italy, not surprisingly, that I got completely addicted to espresso and the whole je ne sais quoi of European coffee, and it got me so psyched as a coffee drinker that I started roasting myself uh, when I came back from that 5 weeks of in Spoleto.
Wow. So before
And
you go on, I should explain to people who don't know that there is a festival in the summer in Spoleto, Italy, which is in Umbria. Um, and it's just a spectacularly beautiful hilltop castle town where one large scale opera is put on each summer. And Der Rosenkavalier by Richard Strauss was the opera. I think was it 2000? I think
yes,
it was in
2000.
2000. So you basically spend 5 weeks rehearsing and performing this opera, and it's an amazing experience. And you get paid to do it. And okay, so you were in Umbria, you were drinking coffee like mad. And you must have been thinking, were you thinking like, I want a career in coffee?
Oh my God, absolutely not. I had no clue at all. But there was something about when I left Spoleto, and one of my the housemates that I had been with, Stephen Sass, bass player, had told me about roasting your own coffee on like the little air popper kind of machine, which is what I did like to excess, let's say, when I came back to New York. The kind of new wave coffee explosion hadn't really happened in New York. Uh, and I was basically had this little air popper thing called a Hearthware Precision, and I was roasting, out of my window, so that the exhaust would not completely destroy my house, because even the little machines made a lot of exhaust. And these were, prosumer machines that were not meant to be used a lot. And I was literally burning out these machines because I was roasting so much coffee. So I'm continuing to roast coffee, and my New York life is filled with freelancing and doing all sorts of amazing stuff, and passing off my beans to people that I would be doing gigs with. And
Like, check this out. I just roasted this coffee. Let me know what you think.
yeah, let me know what you think. And most people had no idea about anything other than Starbucks and buying, some pretty mediocre beans at Zabar's and Fairway. And it was not so easy to get whole bean coffee back in New York in 2001. You
So
people.
I used to go on tour with Meridian Arts Ensemble, and yeah, I was a coffee drinker then, which I'm not now. But I remember going to like diners. There was no such thing as Starbucks. The espresso revolution had not hit, and I can't remember when was it that suddenly there was better coffee. Do you remember
Well,
the
I mean,
year that happened?
well, I mean, it had kind of always been happening in the Bay Area in the 70s and 80s, but it was still under the radar. And Alfred Pete was of Pete's Coffee was one of those the avatars of the business. But most people on the West Coast were kind of in this modality of drinking very dark roasted coffee. And that's kind of what got Starbucks, I think, into their roast profiles, which were dark. And it's a West Coast thing. There was no light roasting, so to speak, as we know it today. which is, again, is taken over on a certain level with efficient with connoisseurs of fine coffee. But the roasting style was very West Coast and was dominated by the Bay Area and Seattle. So it took a while for that to kind of filter into the rest of the consciousness. And by then there were, small companies that like Stumptown in Portland, which was kind of revolutionizing that whole idea of, fine coffee directly sourced from farmers, blah, blah, blah. But the blah, blah, blah was really something that captivated a lot of people that wanted to experience coffee in a different way. So around the early 2000s, I mean, it arguably took off in Chicago in the mid 90s. Company called Intelligentsia, which is a huge company. They kind of were the pioneers, but we didn't have much exposure to it anywhere else in the country. It was a more local. So, it's 25, 30 years that specialty coffee, as we call it, has just gone haywire. So
And when did Starbucks begin or begin to spread, metastasize, let's say?
metastasized pretty much in the early 80s. There was Starbucks, again, was a brilliant marketing company, and had better coffee back in the day, before they got so automated and so mass market, and just completely saturated the market with flavored coffee and the frappuccinos and all. It just went, spiraled out of control. But Intelligentsia, as an example, really was true to its roots and was not about the frou-frou coffee that people were requesting. And I think that Sleepless in Seattle had a lot of Starbucks, stuff, like product placement. That was a very popular movie, or it was You Got Mail. I forget. There were scenes in the Starbucks, and all of a sudden, everybody was talking about Starbucks.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember the joke that Starbucks was so popular that a Starbucks opened up inside the Starbucks.
right.
Yeah.
One
Okay.
one of the one of the strange ironies is that when I came back from Italy, and I was going to a Starbucks at around Lincoln Center in desperation, before a Met show, and there was an ad on the front of the bar that said, we're looking for baristas. And I looked at the word barista, which I had never seen before, despite having been in Italy, where someone who makes coffee is called a barista or makes mixed drinks. But I thought it was just some goofy made up term that, of course, Starbucks would be making stuff up as they were, kind of improvising this whole business model. So that's how little I knew. And I knew even less about roasting coffee, but I learned, by buying beans from a small place in California that I still buy coffee from, called Sweet Maria's. And, I just, you could get any origin and you could roast it however you wanted. And, you think you know a lot until you start doing it commercially, which is what I would find out later. So,
So now we're around 2001. You're in back in New York. We've played Rose and Cavalier together.
yes,
We're back in the city, and you're playing cello,
playing the cello and the net.
roasting
And
coffee in your apartment with the windows open.
yes.
Keep it going from there. What's next?
Well, then at one point I moved about 2002. Well, of course, 9/11 happened, which the little side note is that I had started in about 3 months before 9/11 actually happened. I had started an apprenticeship with a bow maker named Michael Yates, down on 28th Street where his studio was. And I just was learning how to rehair bows because I was very unhappy with the quality of the restringing, rehairing bows that I was getting in New York. And I was told about this guy, and so I was, hey, and he's looking for an apprentice because he doesn't want to ever rehair bows. He just wants to make bows. So I actually got a little air popper roaster for Michael Yates. We would roast it out there was a little balcony area off the studio. And we got into that, and people would come in and say, "What are you roasting coffee? I thought you were rehairing bows here and doing all that stuff." So it was a nice little sideline. And I cut to that because I just, I took a long hiatus from rehairing bows, and because of lots of reasons, I'm about to start doing it again for myself and a couple other people that I know. But I've been in and out of the bow rehairing business for quite a while. So yes, it all ties together, the music and the coffee and the all that stuff together. So
Okay, so you're rehearing Bose. 9/11 is about to happen.
yes,
Um,
9/11 happens and the whole world goes to hell in a handbasket. And
and for people who don't know the impact of 9/11 on New Yorkers, it was profound,
yeah,
absolutely profound. It shut the city down. I heard this. I was living in Park Slope in Brooklyn at the time. I heard the second building fall out my window. It was really, it was visceral. It was present. It was not something we read about in the newspaper. It was something we smelled and heard and felt.
yeah, people were finding leaves of paper from some office at Cantor Fitzgerald on the roof of their place in Brooklyn. So it traveled that far, and yeah, it was craziness.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but one of the problems that I had was that 3 months in, all of a sudden I couldn't get to the shop, and
Mm.
my tenure as an apprentice ended at that point. So I learned an awful lot from this guy, and I was able to kind of continue because he ended up moving to Portland, ironically,
Mm.
uh, several months after that. So I was kind of left in the lurch, but I had enough experience to start rehearing bows and was doing it for colleagues at the Met and other places. And that was, kind of a hair raising experience for me because if you're
No,
not,
no pun intended.
no, 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 but if you're not completely, set in and, how am I doing? And basically, if the plug of the hair comes out in the middle of a performance and a bow that you reheared, you'd be horrified. So I'd be playing in the pit and looking at a bow that I had just given back to a violinist or something, and just praying that it made it through the performance. So that was kind of a mixed blessing. But
But this is
it's
unusual for a performing musician to have the time and desire to expand out to doing other things. In fact, I find that in our training as musicians, it's like, this is the thing you do, this must be all consuming, this is your life. If this isn't your life, there's something wrong.
right.
And I learned much later in life that that was not the case as I developed outside interests. But it sounded like you got there way earlier, and even though you were doing great playing at the opera, you still were embracing these other things, coffee and bow rehearing.
Yes. Well, and the sideline is that my father, who was a fantastic cellist and played in the Met for 39 years, but in the mid 70s he became a bowmaker. So he actually and was at a maximal level in the world, but he was able to do it as a quote unquote hobby and turned out an unbelievable amount of bows and left a legacy of many many bows that are actually sitting in the shop in Chicago right now and waiting for owners, kind of thing. But so this was his passion, and the one thing that he never did as a bow maker was actively rehair bows. He would put new hair in a bow that he would make. But
Could you just, for people who might be watching this and aren't musicians,
Mhm.
could you just explain bow hair, rehairing bows, just to give us a minute and a half course on that?
Okay, so I mean, your contact as a string player with the instrument is through the bow and through the hair, which is horsehair, invariably, and usually sourced from the Mongolia, China, where they have much more animal husbandry, and horses are it's a byproduct. It'll be a dead horse. They'll cut the tail off. Then they have to kind of clean it and what they call dressing it. And there's a lot of bad hair in a horse tail. So when you finally, as a rehairer, buy they call a mass of hair, like a pound of it, it's all tied together. You choose the equivalent of about 150 hairs. You don't do it one by one. You just take a bunch of it and then cull some of the bad ones that may be twisted or some. And it's a fairly complicated process learning how to get the hair in the tip of the bow and also in the frog of the bow. And then it's, playing under tension, and you have to apply rosin, a fossilized or a, just a tree sap,
Sticky
uh,
stuff onto the
sticky
hair.
stuff. Yeah, because otherwise it doesn't produce any sound. I mean, the natural hair with no rosin basically just doesn't make a sound. So the hair needs rosin, and once the bow is rosined and the right tension, the player will have the ability to get whatever kind of a sound they really want.
And when you
Um,
look at a bow, the hair is perfectly organized. So there's no hairs crossing each other like this. They're all lined up perfectly like
yep.
that. That
Hmm.
must be painstaking work for the person who's putting the hair on.
Yes, it once you get the hang of it, it's a fairly quick process, but it does have to, every step is incredibly precise, and you're working with very, very small uh, things like pieces of maple that hold the plug of hair into the tip of the bow, and it basically fits in this kind of an area. Yeah, it's one of those things that until you actually learn how to do it, which is beyond the ken of most people that play instruments because it's painstaking work. And I find that in general, musicians are, uh, especially string players, just don't know a lot about maintenance of their instruments, and bows especially fall into that category. And if you're the victim of a quote unquote bad rehair, it's a costly thing to do and redo, and it really can affect how it sounds, how your instrument sounds.
And
So,
how much does a bow rehair cost these days typically?
well, these days, even in Portland, it's probably between 100 and $125.
And how often do you have to have your bow rehaired?
Well, it depends on how much you play because the hair eventually kind of wears out. The rosin just doesn't get the kind of sound out of the hair that it did when it's fresh. Some people are very anal about it and rehair their bows a lot. Some people like me are a little more slacker and wait a couple of years. It depends on really how much you're playing, but you hear it. Your feedback loop is it's all about the sound for a string player. So when your hair is kind of like giving it up, and that's when you take it to and hopefully the rehair is sensitive enough to your instrument and to the bow itself, and will kind of make it an okay process to do.
Okay, so now we're in the early 2000s. 9/11 has happened. You're still in New York. You're rehairing bows. You're roasting coffee as an amateur, but
Yes,
giving it to people to try. You're still playing the cello.
yes. Still playing the cello. I get burned out, and in 2005, after 7 years in the Met and a lot of other freelance stuff, uh, my then partner and I decided to move to the West Coast. It's like, why would I give that up? I was kind of spoiled, and sometimes if you play, it's like too much steak. Let's say you play La Boheme 18 times in a season. It's a great opera, and it's fun to play. And in the Met, it's just an incredible experience with primo music experience. But you're still kind of a wage slave on some level, uh, and it can be a little bit constricting. So I had that kind of wanderlust. I'd never lived on the West Coast. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I did not want to play, music in New York at that point. So I just packed it up and we moved out to Portland. I didn't know what the hell I was going to do.
How'd you choose
Uh,
Portland?
I'm sorry, why Portland?
Why Portland?
Uh, the then partner got a job as an academic advisor, which was what she had been doing. And first it looked maybe like it would be San Francisco, but then Portland was calling, so we moved to Portland. And
Okay.
I had a cousin out here, and I thought, it can't be that bad, right? What the hell is Portland? I had absolutely no clue. So it was really an adventure.
So take us from there. What happens next?
So in Portland, I spend the first couple of months after unpacking it. We moved cross country in a truck with two cats. It took 5 days, and loved Portland. It's an astonishing drive to get out to the coast. And once you hit the gorge, the Columbia Gorge in the state of Oregon, and you're following the Columbia River, it's like, what the hell is this? If you've never lived on the West Coast, it's like it just doesn't. It looks like the moon. It's just fascinating. So lots of trees and a very progressive city, very easy city to live in because of food and food and drink, and it's a major wine producing region. And then the coffee thing was just off the charts. So Stumptown had become like a big player in the specialty coffee market. It seemed like what everybody wanted was what Stumptown was doing. So I literally got a roaster. I finally had to get a roaster that could do more than like 8 ounces of coffee. So I had a Brinkman grill, and I found a stainless steel drum that had a motor on it that would do like 4 pounds of coffee. And I started a coffee business based on roasting 4 pounds of coffee at a time, and found a customer who had just opened up a coffee shop, and they took a chance on me, and I sold a lot of coffee, and then finally, grew out of the little backyard barbecue roaster, and paired myself when halvesies on a commercial 5 kilo roaster with another roaster in town who had also never owned his own piece of equipment.
So
So
it
yeah,
sounds like in the New York freelancing business, personal relationships, getting along with people, that's very important. Sounds
yes.
like the same thing was the case in the coffee business.
Oh my God, absolutely. But because coffee was so relatively new, even to Portland, where it was kind of exploding, you could see that it was exploding on the West Coast, and the epicenter was going to be Portland, it seems. And when I started, when I got a commercial roaster, uh, I barely had a business. I mean, my brother set up a website for me, and it was called Bad Beards, still called Bad Beards, a nickname I've had for a long time. And yeah, just basically got started with one customer, and then some online, orders. Friends took a chance with me, and
And
just got to know the business.
this is pretty early in the internet world. I mean,
Yes.
I got my first computer in 1995, and people were still saying, "Do you use email?" and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
it sounds like you were a fairly early adopter of. I also remember, like, is it safe to buy things over this internet? Um, that security hadn't been figured out. So, all of which is to say, you got into selling stuff online. It sounds like kind of on the early side. That must have been a
It,
risk.
it was fairly early, and there wasn't a lot of coffee available online.
Hmm.
And people were kind of all over the internet and saying, "Well, what can I buy?" And I guess coffee was one of those things that just was, there was this the whole gestalt of West Coast coffee was appealing to people in other parts of the country because they didn't have their own local roasting scene. So it really became a thing. And yeah, I was kind of in the start of it, but I was also just it was fraught with all sorts of kind of craziness with the internet just being underdeveloped and under attended and security and all that other stuff. So yeah, I mean it works a lot smoother now. But even though there was Amazon, there was nothing like Amazon as we know it. So it was a very different world in 2006, which is when I started. So
Yeah. So we're in the middle of the 2000 aughts.
yes,
You bought your bigger coffee roaster. Are you playing any cello at this point? Are you rehearing bows? Are you having a
I had been.
tripartite career?
Yeah, well, I had sort of not, made a decision to not play much. But then I started subbing in the Oregon Symphony, and which is a wonderful orchestra, and was going through its own transitions with a new conductor a couple of years in, Carlos Kalmar. And it was a lot of older school players were being kind of worked out, moved out, and younger people were filling. So it was kind of advancing as an orchestra in a big way, and there was ballet, and there was a Portland Opera. It was kind of small change, and But there were like three union gigs in the entire city, and there's still three union gigs in the city. And it's a tough times to be in the ballet and the orchestra, the ballet and the opera. I'm sorry. The Oregon Symphony is continuing really, really well. It's a fantastic orchestra. I haven't played there probably about 6 years by now, but in 2009, I did a 1 year contract with the orchestra and got to sort of revisit a lot of music that I liked. So, but I'm don't really have the personality to enjoy like playing a full-time music gig because I have so many other interests, and doing coffee and music at the same time was really quite challenging. So
So right now, are you a coffee roaster?
I am a coffee roaster.
Are you a bow rehairer?
I will be shortly. I left it for years. I mean, there are lots of reasons why. It's also pretty tedious work. And I was it just kind of a bow maker friend named Daryl Hanks moved into Portland probably about 2008 or nine, and I was happy to see that he was ready to start doing rehairing and that kind of stuff because it was just not really enjoying it that much. But once he got established, and he's still here, and he's a very fine bow maker, I felt like this is definitely my time to not do this anymore. So
So, would you call coffee roasting? Is there a artistic side of this? Do you get the same kind of fulfillment you get from playing in an orchestra or playing cello in general? What is it about coffee roasting that keeps you going?
well, the aesthetic it's taken a long time to develop. But the nuances of actually, getting coffees from different parts of the world fascinates me. The quality control, working on a very small scale, and then having a kind of like a direct relationship with customers that have been with me for years and new ones, of course. But I'm only working by myself, and I for a while had an assistant sort of filling in a little bit if I needed to go to New York or something like that. He sadly passed away, and he was a retired doctor. He passed away in the beginning of 2024, so I was kind of back on my own again, which is fine because it's a manageable business the way I do it. I have certain days where I get a little crazy and have to roast coffee for 10 or 12 hours, and but every single roast seems to just sort of spark a new interest in coffee, and I never had that experience with music. There's a familiarity with the actual beans that you're roasting until you get new ones that just seems like visiting an old friend, and it's like playing a piece of music that you've played before. It's very cozy, and it's never boring. But it does aesthetically push a lot of buttons for me. So, and then
So,
knowing that people enjoy it is the best part.
correct me if I have this wrong, which I'm pretty certain I do. Coffee grows in a bush. It makes a berry.
Yes,
The pit of the berry is the coffee bean. Is that correct?
the seeds.
The
Yeah, it has
seeds.
either two seeds or one seed, which is a natural mutation, which they call pea berry. So it's a pea berry is a coffee bean that's slightly stouter, rounder, and can be separated when it's produced into just generally it's blended in together because it's a small proportion of what comes out of the regular coffee cherry, which has two seeds. So, but the evolution of the coffee itself, of course, it's coming from very far flung climes, let's say, mostly around the equator.
So
Uh,
it's a warm weather bush. It
yeah,
produces. Okay.
yeah, and depending on where it's grown, of course, I mean, it grows all over the world, including even the United States, and not even just Hawaii. Recently, someone started growing coffee in Goleta, California, of all places, near Santa Barbara, I think. It shouldn't be doable, but it was with good plant husbandry. But it's a fascinating species of plant, and of course we can't live without it. It seems, um, and the coffee that I choose to roast really comes from all over the world. So it almost feels like kind of an international excursion every time I roast, something from Indonesia or from Central America or Brazil or wherever it's from. So it's fascinating business, and it's also it's one of those necessary things that I think when you have climate change, which is so serious especially in these very sensitive areas where coffee grows. I mean, everywhere, of course, but it's trying to keep up with what's going on. I'm trying to tie in to your previous interview because you had a climate scientist,
Yes, that
and
was episode 2 with Encore Desai, and please check that out. Those who are interested, we talked about climate worldwide and what's happening and what we can do.
it was
So,
fascinating.
thank you. So, it sounds like climate change is definitely affecting the coffee bushes around the world in some
Oh
way.
my God. It's a massive importance to the world to try to. I mean, there's really no going back. But what it has led to is a lot of development of different kind of what they call hybrids that maybe grow uh, with a kind of abundance that the older shrubs uh, used to, but now are more sensitive to climate change and insects. And it's such a complicated business to grow coffee in shade, or as like the supermarket coffee, which is jacked up on caffeine, what we call robusta, which is a different varietal. But that's 40% of the coffee that grows in the world is robusta coffee, and tends to grow in low-lying, lower elevations, and places like Vietnam have surged to the top with Brazil in world coffee production because they're able to grow it. It grows very fast, robusta, and it has very high yield, and it's also very bitter, and twice the caffeine of Arabica coffee that you hear about.
Wow.
So, but it's a
Um,
big thing.
I have so many questions. First, since you sort of touched on this or led me to this, there's been let's just say, a certain amount of tariff uncertainty in our country of late. Is that situation affecting you in some way?
Yeah, it was very it scared the pants out of importers, especially because all of a sudden, let's say you're shipping a container of, a 38,000 pound container of coffee from a place that all of a sudden is going to have a tariff applied to it, which is, depending on the country of origin and where it last landed, was going to be anywhere from 10% to 42% or something like that. So it caused massive uncertainty in the buying of coffee worldwide as a commodity, and it drove people nuts, and me less than someone like a big institutional coffee buyer who's buying millions of pounds of coffee. But it was applied. There was the hanging tariff on a container of coffee that I bought part of from Peru. It's like when it came in, the tariff had been removed. So I was quoted a price based on the tariff being 60 cents, 70 cents a pound, and that was finally removed when it landed in the state.
That
So
worked
yeah, very
in the right direction for you.
it's stable. The whole coffee market is kind of subject to the vicissitudes of commodity trading. This is another, massive. We could talk for hours about any single issue about coffee, but by and large, coffee has been way underpriced considering how hard it is to grow and how backbreaking it is, and mostly in poorer countries where labor is cheap. That's the only reason that we have coffee at the existing price structure. It should. We've been spoiled for a long time. Uh,
That's interesting because as I said, I don't really drink coffee anymore.
Hmm.
But I do go to the local coffee shop on campus here at UW Madison, and
Hmm.
I get a cup of tea, which is outrageously expensive in my opinion because a cup of tea costs kind of the same as a box of 20 tea bags would cost.
Right.
Um, and the coffee seems so expensive, $4.50 for a coffee or something like that.
Yep.
And but you're telling me that actually that's kind of a discounted, like we're lucky it's that price right now.
We are lucky, considering that coffee for decades and decades was selling institutionally for about $1 a pound. I mean, if you were a coffee roaster, you could buy coffee for between $1 and $1.20 a pound, and sell it for $8 a pound, pretty much. And there's a reason, the economy of scale of how much loss you have when you roast coffee, blah blah blah, and then all your other expenses. But the raw goods were, as an input, was not even that, was very low compared to some other agricultural products, and it shouldn't have been. But since it was, traded on the commodity exchange in Chicago like pork bellies and orange juice, and it was just not. It didn't have an added value to it until the specialty coffee scene started happening. And then people realized that, well, if you wanted to buy Brazil coffee, which didn't have a lot of character, it would cost X. But if you wanted something special, like from Colombia or El Salvador or wherever, it was going to be a little bit more expensive. So it's slowly moved up the food chain, so to speak. But now, when coffee is costing, $10 a pound for the raw coffee, um, that's an astonishing change for the buyers of coffee who have to roast it.
Fortunately for the people who rely on the coffee industry, it is an addictive thing to drink, which means that the market is probably not diminishing at all.
No, and it's funny because I've heard some stories that some of the ultra refined and super special coffees that are being played around with on the growing side. Uh, Again, a very very complicated subject, but that has actually increased, and the super specialty expensive primo stuff that people are paying absurd prices for continues unabated. So it's the mid range stuff that has probably been hit the hardest. Sorry for the cough now. Talking when you're not feeling great is like, anyway. But yeah, no, the dynamics of coffee buying for someone even like me who works on a very small scale, I want to still buy the most interesting coffee that I can, and I'm able to source it in ways that big institutional buyers can too. So pay a little more upfront, and there's always shipping involved, and it's a lot to kind of track all the time. But the basic price structure is kind of stable in a way. It's just at a much higher price point than when I started 20 years ago.
How many steps removed are you from the people who are actually growing the beans? Or do you travel ever and meet those people?
I wish. The my literally only experience at a coffee farm was when I was living in Mexico, way before I was a coffee roaster. I took a trip in the state of Veracruz to a little town called Coatepec, which is produces a lot of coffee, and I stayed overnight with my stepdaughter at a Hacienda Coatepec, this little place in the middle of their own coffee plantation. So that was kind of my intro. Even though Mexico is a big producer of coffee, you don't get the hands-on experience all that often in a coffee plantation. And I mean, it's not like I got a tour of the manufacturing facility or anything like that, but I'm walking them out, outside of my room in the middle of a plantation where the coffee's growing, and that was pretty exciting. Came across a little farmer with his little lot of coffee that he was selling. He was in a loincloth and lived in a hut, and it was like, where the hell am I? So much of coffee production is kind of like that all over the world.
Very local.
Done, yeah, very local and done by what they call smallholder farmers that may have like an acre of coffee shrubs, 400 trees, or shrubs. And yeah, and very often they aggregate in co-op setups, to be able to kind of take advantage of all the small producers, sharing the burdens of the actual production of the coffee facility, which is kind of a complicated thing. So generally, the coffee's produced, it's exported, an importer buys it, an exporter sells it, because generally the small producers are not, they're not handling the financial side of that. So producing the coffee, yeah, I'm many steps removed from that. There are many hands that touch it literally and figuratively before I get it. And that's one of the reasons it ends up costing a lot more, than its production value, literal production value. So
Are you able to exercise some moral judgment in how you acquire the coffee? Are you able to somehow find people who work with small producers, or is there anything in your sourcing where you're able to support the kinds of people growing the coffee that you would like to support, or are you too many?
absolutely.
You are.
Oh, absolutely. No, the conscious choices, I mean, there are a lot of, depending on the country of origin, but there's some places, a lot of, in women do a very disproportionate amount of the actual labor producing coffee, maybe 70%, and see probably the least amount of economic benefit from it directly. That's just a patriarchal worldwide system of malfeasance, which is slowly being addressed. But so I do try to buy coffee from women producers when possible. And then, organic is a big thing, for on many levels. It doesn't guarantee quality, but it does guarantee a kind of sort of a eye towards sustainability, which is really, really important in the coffee sector. Um, because very, sensitive microclimates that these things grow in, and coffee has a big footprint. And the inputs, which, we call fertilizer, or chemicals, pesticides and things like that, are all, those are all moving parts, and those are costing a lot more and having a lot more impact on the farmers. So it's complicated. The war in Ukraine, when it came to like fertilizer prices and things like that, I mean, you wouldn't think that like the Ukrainian war is going to impact, but oh my God, it's a tremendous thing worldwide when it comes to fertilizers and other things that get put into coffee production. So yeah, I mean, you have to kind of be conscious of it. It's impossible not to be if you're a thinking person. But there are certain countries where it's just not, where all the inputs are thought about in a different way, like in Brazil, which produces just massive scale of coffee. So it's not grown in shade, generally speaking. They use a lot of chemicals that probably you don't want to know about. But it's, they're producing, billions of pounds of coffee. So it has to be done in a certain way, and it's done mechanically harvested, and as opposed to, hand picked, which is mostly what I buy. So yeah, I know that I don't have to know the farmers, but I know that the people that are representing them, and that they're taking care, that they're making sure that they get a more equitable part of, their production, is something that's really important to me. So I do that wherever I possibly can. And
That's
yeah, it's
fascinating.
important.
I never would have made the association between the war in Ukraine affecting coffee via fertilizer, but it makes total sense.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Our world is much more tied together than we ever probably imagined.
Oh yeah. And the
We all
more,
know our own small niche in the world.
well, and the climate change thing, of course, as you can extrapolate, in these extremely sensitive areas where coffee generally grows on the equator. Uh, I mean, you just take the recent activity in Sumatra. There was just a horrific monsoon activity and storms that killed hundreds or thousands of people, and it also just, on a side note, kind of wrecked the production in that part of northern Sumatra. In 2017, there was this horrific monsoon-related flooding and tsunami and wiped out Sulawesi coffee in Indonesia. Things like that happen all the time. The monsoon season, which is part of everything having to do with Asian, weather systems, uh, which a climatologist would be, studying. Why are they so horrific? They've gotten so much worse. Um, Place like India, which grows a lot of coffee, had and tea, of course, but they've had tremendously adverse impact from the growing of monsoon size, where they lose like half of the crop of the entire country. So they get used to that.
All right, I got two short questions. One is, and I'll ask them both together. One is, do you still drink a ton of coffee? And two is, can individual consumers buy coffee from you directly, and how?
Yes, I don't drink a ton of coffee because I'm not a barista. I think that generally when you're preparing espresso in quantity and you work in a coffee shop, you're testing a lot. That's probably where you get the most caffeine input. I drink it in the morning. I drink it at about 6 o'clock to kind of get myself through, the rest of the day. It doesn't affect my sleep or anything like this. I can drink it late, and I just love coffee that much. So I'll drink it anytime, and I have to test a lot of all the coffee that I roast, of course. But I'm not consuming that much caffeine. So I'm kind of normal and maybe even less than normal caffeine drinkers. But my website is badbeards.coffee or badbeardscoffee.com.
Bad beards,
Um,
plural, yes? Bad beards,
Bad beards with an S, yes,
coffee.
yes.
Or dot coffee.
The badbeards.coffee. Dot coffee has become kind of like a tag in the coffee industry. Not everybody's using, but it's definitely in, yeah. So badbeards.coffee.
I will get
And
that into a comment below on YouTube. I will make that, I'll
yes,
put that link in a comment for
and I
people.
have a lot of music, friendly little aphorisms that I put in my coffee bags, and they, make them kind of personal and still, deal with a lot of musicians. It's a completely word of mouth business. So for some reason, I have like 10% of the Cleveland Orchestra that is buying coffee, and it all started with a horn player who doesn't even drink coffee. Basically, Hans Klepsch. He's a tea drinker by trade, and yet he somehow has done me a world of good and like spread the word with his colleagues and stuff like that. So
We
it's
horn players
it's
are a good lot.
yeah, and they're not that many. Although Scott Brubaker, who's been playing an online word game with me for about almost 20 years, he's a regular. So yeah, even horn players need to drink coffee.
Well, thanks so much. It's really a fascinating career or series of careers that you've had, and I really appreciate learning about all of that. Thank you.
And we'll have to continue this because you were the guy who introduced to me. I will never forget when we were in a market in Spoleto, and who is this Dan guy? I barely kind of knew you, but you spoke enough Italian from your experience that when you mentioned the word etto you asked for an etto of something. It's like, what the hell is that? He said, I got to hang out with this guy. He knows how to get like all the ettos of food. And of course, it turned out to be like 100 grams, right? But yeah, I will forever be grateful to you for that and many other things.
It's the least I can do.
Well, and Meridian, let's even go with Meridian because
Well,
this has been
thank
an
you.
important thing in my life.
Thank you so much. And thanks for talking with me.
And guys, if you are listening to Dan and you know about the Zappa house concert, you need to pimp yourself a little bit more for that because that's an astonishing thing. So I'm grateful for that.
Thank you.